All right, let's dive into one of the most fascinating and, frankly, misunderstood parts of the human brain. For a long, long time, we thought we had the cerebellum completely figured out. But it turns out this little brain has been hiding a massive secret in plain sight.
So if you look at it, the cerebellum seems pretty unassuming. It's tucked away at the back of your head right underneath the main event, the cerebral cortex. And if you were to actually weigh it, it only makes up about 10% of your brain's total mass. Kind of small, right?
Well, here's where it gets wild. Despite being just a fraction of the size, the cerebellum is home to over half. Yeah, you heard that right. More than 50% of all the neurons in your entire brain. It's just jam-packed with them. And that, of course, leads to the billion-dollar question that has kept neuroscientists up at night for decades. I mean, if this thing is so small, why on earth does it need more brain cells than the rest of the brain combined? What in the world are they all doing in there? Let's find out. Okay, so for most of modern history, the answer seemed pretty simple. The cerebellum was the brain's motor maestro. Its one big, famous job was to coordinate movement. And you know what? It's absolutely brilliant at this. The cerebellum is why you can stand upright without thinking about it. It coordinates all your complex movements, and this is the really cool part, it handles motor learning. You know when you're learning to hit a baseball or ride a bike? That whole process of trial and error, getting a little smoother and more automatic each time? Yep, that's pure cerebellum at work. And we know this for sure because when the cerebellum gets damaged, maybe from a stroke or a tumor, the results are immediate and dramatic. Patients develop a condition called ataxia. Now, this isn't weakness, it's a total loss of coordination. It can look like an unsteady, almost drunk-like walk, or something called an intention tremor, where the closer your hand gets to an object, the more it shakes. So here's the key thing to remember. The cerebellum doesn't start the movement. Instead, it's like a super sophisticated quality control system. It takes the rough draft of a movement command from the brain and refines it, making it smooth, adaptive, and accurate. And for the longest time, we thought that was it. That was its one and only job. But how does it even do that? And more importantly, how does this all connect back to that big secret we talked about?
Well, the answer isn't in the structure itself, it's in the wiring.
See, it turns out there was a massive two-way information superhighway running between the big brain, the cerebrum, and the little brain, the cerebellum. These are called the cerebrocerebellar loops, and they are buzzing with signals, sending information back and forth constantly.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Check out the path these signals take. It's a double-crossed loop. So a signal from the right side of your cerebrum crosses the midline over to the left hemisphere of your cerebellum. The cerebellum does its thing, processes the signal, and then sends it back, but it crosses the midline again, returning to the right side of the cerebrum where it started. So right cerebrum talks to left cerebellum, and left cerebrum talks to right cerebellum. This crisscross connection is absolutely crucial, so keep it in mind.
Because then, in the late 1990s, clinicians started noticing something strange. Their patients with cerebellar damage had all the expected motor problems, sure, but they also had a bunch of other issues, cognitive issues, that just couldn't be explained by the old model. This led doctors to identify a brand new condition, Cerebellar Cognitive Affective Syndrome, or CCAS. Suddenly, it wasn't just about clumsiness. These patients had trouble with high-level executive functions, like planning their day. They struggled with puzzles, had trouble finding the right words, and even their personalities changed. Some became emotionally flat, others became totally disinhibited. And boom, there it was, the big reveal. This was the proof. The cerebellum wasn't just a motor device. It was deeply, fundamentally involved in how we think, how we perceive, and even how we feel. The little brain wasn't just coordinating movement. It looked like it was coordinating thought itself. This discovery turned neuroscience on its head. So this just blew the doors open for a whole new line of research. If the cerebellum was involved in thinking, how did that actually work? Well, a really groundbreaking study from researchers at Jagiellonian University, published by the NIH, gave us a huge piece of the puzzle. They looked at patients with damage to the left side of their cerebellum and compared them to patients with damage on the right. And what they found was just astonishing. Patients with damage on the left side of the cerebellum had very specific targeted problems, mostly with things like visuospatial skills and attention. But the patients with damage on the right side, they had a much more widespread global cognitive decline. It hit everything: language, memory, attention, you name it. Let's just look at the data here.
This chart shows you the test scores. Higher bar, better performance. So you see the controls on the left, doing great. In the middle, you've got the folks with left-sided lesions. There's a dip, but it's kind of contained. But then, just look at that third bar. The patients with right-sided damage performed way worse across pretty much every single test. The effect wasn't just bigger, it was broader.
So what's the takeaway here? Well, remember that double-crossed pathway we talked about? The right cerebellum talks to the left cerebrum, which for most people is where our language abilities live. The researchers realized that when you damage the right cerebellum, you don't just mess with language. You disrupt a core network that seems to have a cascading global impact on a person's entire cognitive function. This was a completely new way of thinking about it.
And look, this isn't just some interesting thought experiment for scientists. Understanding these connections has a massive real-world impact on patients. Damage to the cerebellum can happen for a lot of serious reasons. We're talking about strokes, vascular problems, and especially in kids, brain tumors like astrocytomas and medulloblastomas.
And the stakes here are incredibly high. This table shows the 5-year survival rates for some of these childhood tumors. You can see that for something like a pilocytic astrocytoma, the outlook is actually very good. But for others, like high-grade gliomas, the prognosis is heartbreaking. This huge variation is exactly why understanding the specific job of each tiny part of the cerebellum is so vital for treatment and recovery.
But let's focus on that top number for a second. Up to 97% survival for a pilocytic astrocytoma. That's amazing. And it's why this research is so critical. The better we understand the precise function of each part of the cerebellum, the more precise surgeons can be, and the better clinicians can predict and treat the cognitive side effects for the growing number of survivors. It's about quality of life.
So, let's just pull this all together. What we're seeing is a complete revolution in how we think about the cerebellum.
It's crystal clear now that the cerebellum isn't just some optional add-on for motor skills. Through that massive double-crossed superhighway, it's an essential coprocessor for the main brain. It seems to refine our thoughts, our language, and our emotions in the exact same way it refines our movements, making everything we do and everything we think just a little more adaptive and accurate. That's the secret. It's a universal editor for the brain.
Which leaves us with one last, kind of mind-blowing thought. For more than 100 years, we've fundamentally misunderstood the job of more than half the neurons in our own heads. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other massive secrets is the brain still keeping from us? What else are we missing?